So thank you for joining the session. Last day, GDPR, most interesting topic in the world. Give it up to you. Yeah. Well done. No, honestly, thank you for joining me today. My name is Noah Katz. I'm based off of Tel Aviv. And I run product marketing for Checkpoint's mobility and SaaS security products. And I also project manage our GDPR efforts. So I want to start off by trying to get to know you a little bit better. How many of you have heard about GDPR? Okay, that's fair. How many of you recognize that they need to do something about it within their organization? 1, 2, okay, that's impressive. Do you feel equipped to do it? Not really, okay. Then there's a solid case for a presentation today. Let's do this. So although data security is at the core of GDPR, there's very little that is said and discussed on how to secure that data. And that is the purpose of our conversation today. For those of you, and I saw that there are a few of you hearing about GDPR for the very first time, GDPR stands for the European Union's General Data Protection Regulation. It's a vast European regulation that will utterly transform the way businesses worldwide do business with Europe. It goes into effect on 25th May, very soon, and it will apply to any company in the world doing business with Europe, regardless of where they operate from. So even if you're in Singapore, in Japan, in India, in Australia, wherever, you need to comply with it if you're doing businesses with Europe. Penalties for non-compliance may reach up to 20 million euros or 4% of a company's worldwide turnover. So that's pretty high. And as of today, you have 84 days left to finalize your preparations for it. I want you to keep in mind that GDPR asks for companies to gain accountability for the personal data that they hold within their organization about European citizens. It asks them to understand where data is obtained from, how it is being stored, how it is being processed, who is it transferred to, what do these third parties do with that data. And that means that GDPR asks companies to take accountability for our personal data as citizens. It's not a bad thing, right? Now, is GDPR the next Y2K? I hear this comparison a lot. I know both have deadlines, both had, severe presumed consequences if the deadlines were not met. Both created complete panic and buzz around them. But while Y2K was mostly smoke and mirrors, GDPR is very much real, and I cannot stress this enough. The deadline that I just mentioned, the 25th of May, if anything, this will only be the kickoff of GDPR. It will not be the end of it. So now that we've kind of established that GDPR is important and there's a certain urgency around it, I want to kind of walk you through what practical things you can do to establish a GDPR-aware network, and more than that, what you can do to be proactive in your GDPR efforts. And I hope that at the end of the session, you'll understand that it's not as bad as it seems. I do want to start with the kind of the background of the theoretical understanding of GDPR. GDPR was first initiated in 2012. It was adopted in 2016, and it serves as a successor and enhancer to a former directive, a European directive, the 1995 Data Protection Directive. It aims to adapt legislation in Europe to what appears to be an ever-evolving data-driven world, right? We all live in a world where digital privacy is kind of a gray area. How many of you got recommendations for restaurants nearby while you were here? How many of you get personalized recommendations for purchasing items on Amazon and whatnot, right? They know everything about us, and GDPR aims to try and legislate that. And although it has a lot more teeth than the 1995 directive and penalties and so on, GDPR aims to serve mainly as a framework. It's a perceptual, cultural change to the way organizations perceive how they handle personal data. And it aims to help European citizens reclaim control over their personal data. Again, a good thing. So at core, GDPR aims to establish data privacy as a fundamental human right rather than as a consumer right. And again, as mentioned, it will apply to any company that handles, processes, and stores European citizens' private information, regardless of whether they operate in the EU or not. So it has worldwide impact. We already saw that it has very high penalties, and it's definitely here to stay. As security practitioners, I can tell you that GDPR, there's a lot about it that will still be untangled as time passes by, and we will all learn a lot from it. It will shape the way we approach data security. And there are some challenges, of course. GDPR is not a technology, it doesn't offer a technology solution that you can just buy off the shelf and tick a box to comply with, right? Under Article 32, GDPR states that data should be processed in a way that ensures data security, integrity, and confidentiality. Very interesting, but it doesn't really tell us how to do it. It doesn't specify what are the technical requirements in order to do that. So there's no security standard for it. And at the end of the day, it's also new. So there are a lot of parts about it that have yet to be, formalized or established. For instance, GDPR talks about codes of conduct, which are industry best practices that will help organizations adhere to GDPR and understand what they should be doing about it. But these have yet to be formalized, right? We haven't kicked off GDPR yet. It talks about EDPB, the European Data Protection Board, which is a compliance body that will presumably enforce data protection all across Europe. But this EDPB has yet to be formalized. Again, a lot to be untangled. So what does it mean to be GDPR compliant? For me personally, current discussion around GDPR revolves mainly around documentation, right? You need to understand where data flows within your organization, how it is stored. You need to gain consent. You need to make data available. You need to provide reasoning for why you're collecting the data that you're collecting. You need to be aware and document and explain. But on 25th May, which is 84 days from now, you, as companies, will still own technical responsibility for complying with GDPR. So how do you establish a GDPR-aware network? The first thing that I want you to keep in mind is that GDPR is a journey. It's not a destination. It's an ongoing thing, an ongoing learning curve that we will all experience and learn from. But the point for this conversation is to say you're not in it alone. And I want to embark on this GDPR journey. And the first stop to understand GDPR is from the actual text. And I realize it may seem like a jungle at first. We said it's a journey already. But I want to clear some of the way to show you. So the first thing that's mentioned in the GDPR text is the concept of data protection by design and by default. GDPR asks that you embed security programs and measures from the designing of the development of processes and business products. And that means, it's a concept that's been around for years, right? But it's only just now becoming a legal requirement with GDPR. Basically calls for the inclusion of security measures from the onset of the designing of systems rather than as an addition. And that means that there's a major focus on security architecture. If we're asked to embed security and data security from the onset of the designing of systems, we need to be focusing on architecture. Another thing the GDPR text focuses on is a risk-based approach. GDPR asks that we embed security measures that correlate to the level of risk that is reflected from the processing that we do of personal data. And again, under Article 32, it states the controller and the processor shall implement appropriate measures to ensure a level of security appropriate to the risk. Now, GDPR doesn't really state how to do that, but there are some trends that emerge from the text and security best practices that I will touch on immediately. And then finally, GDPR poses a lot of requirements. It asks you to gain consent for every collection of the data. It asks you to provide reasoning of why you are collecting and processing the data. It asks you to make the data available for citizens at all time. But what's important for you as security practitioners is a data breach notification. So GDPR asks that you notify of a possible breach within 72 hours of first becoming aware of it. And you would have to notify both compliance body and possible impacted citizens. So these three, protection by design and by default, risk-based approach, and data breach notification, are kind of like the three main text references that we base our security, data security approach upon. Just going to take a quick sip. So going on that journey, what are the critical first steps, right? What do we need to pack on this GDPR journey? The first step is staffing. There's a major focus within GDPR around leadership. Who is in charge within your organization to design, implement, and assess security programs? So try to identify key leads within your organization and decide if you want to hire a DPO or outsource one. The second is data audit and classification. This is a primary recommendation, right? Understanding how data flows within your organization, and how is it classified. So try to map data flows within your organization and also include third parties and backup systems. Risk analysis. So again, risk will determine your investment in security programs for GDPR. And risk is a general construct that we all operate within, right? What is the likelihood of something to happen? What security controls do I need to implement to eliminate that risk? How much will these security controls cost me? And then does the benefit of having these security controls outweigh the cost of the risk? And this ties a direct link between a risk calculation to security programs for GDPR. But GDPR has a very clear financial implication, and that makes the risk analysis a very interesting discussion for GDPR. You might find yourself bumping heads with accounting, right? They can say, okay, you're coming up to me with a security program that's worth 40 million euros, but I know that a maximum fine may reach up to 20 million euros. That's a risk that I'm willing to take in that case. So again, this is a very interesting discussion, and the recommendation here would be to try and leverage security controls that you already have in store and systems that you have in store so that you can make your GDPR security program cost effective, at least for now, until things become a little bit more clear with GDPR. The next step is activity logging and breach identification. This is another practice that will probably be shaped greatly, just like it happened with the Sarbanes-Oxley Act. But the recommendation here is to establish robust audit trails so that kind of at any given point you can be aware if an event has happened. And then finally, implement fundamental security controls to help you with GDPR. And now we're going to touch base on how you conclude what these fundamental controls are. I'm going to wait for you to grab some shots. Okay. So GDPR, oh, sorry, do you want me to go back? Cool. Again, we're within the journey theme. So aside from the text, GDPR, what it does do, it gives us 4 core principles for understanding what a data security approach should look like. 4 milestones, if you will, in this journey. So the first is pseudonymization and encryption. Again, understanding how data flows within your organization and ensuring that only people with defined access should be able to view it. The second is the integrity of processing systems, ensuring that at any given time you're able to identify if threat actors pose threats to personal data that resides in your organization. The third is quick access restoration. So because GDPR puts a lot of emphasis on making data available for you at all times, you should be able, as a company, to ensure that even if your systems fell down, you would be able to bring them back up in a timely manner to ensure that they're always available for you, for citizens, that is. And then finally, regular assessment, which is the constant evaluation of the effectiveness of your security programs. And again, this is a construct that we all operate within. You know, what are my security gaps and issues? What changes do I need to implement to fix those? Implement the controls, and then assess the extent to which you've done so effectively. So a reoccurring cycle, and these are the four pillars, if you will, the 4 milestones that GDPR presents for you to establish a security approach. So what Checkpoint has done is identify 12 security controls, 12 security best practices that are based on these 4 core principles that I just mentioned. Of course, it's based on our understanding and leadership within the cybersecurity space, understanding of best practices, and of course, liaising with third-party and consultants. I'm not going to go through all of them because that will take a long time, but I do encourage you to go ahead and download a white paper that we have available on our website. I will also present it to you. I'll provide a link at the end of the session. What I will do, though, is focus on the first 4 ones because I think they give a good example, and they're probably the most important ones. So the first is data classification. Again, how is data classified within your organization, when it can be public, and when it should be maintained private? Configuration change management. So looking at logs is a great way to understand if a change has been made to your network, and that also applies to the way that security administrators make changes. So looking at logs would be a beneficial way to understand if a change has been made to configuration in a way that runs counter with your GDPR efforts. The third, administrator controls and separation of duties. If you were to change rules or run a quick analysis on them, that would be beneficial and helpful in the broader GDPR context. And then finally, secure system configuration. This ties into the concept of integrity and being able to understand at any given time if a possible breach or an event has happened to pose a threat to your GDPR efforts. And now I'm going to go through some of the Checkpoint products that we have that can help you practically with these security controls. So we've mentioned the importance of assessing risk for your organization, right? And Checkpoint Check Me is a very effective, easy, free way of looking for security holes within your GDPR program. What it does is it tests vulnerabilities against advanced threats, and it does that by stimulating behaviors that are consistent with breach activities, like data leakage. So it is able to identify areas in which you have private data that resides in your network and where malicious activity could possibly breach, access and breach that data. Sorry, breach and access that data. Now let's talk about specific products and how they tackle the different controls that I've mentioned. So we have DLP, Checkpoint DLP, and Capsule Docs for data classification, R8010 security management for configuration change management and administrator controls and separation of duties. And then we have the Checkpoint Compliance Blade for secure system configuration. Now don't worry, I'm going to go through each and every one of them, kind of show you some examples. So Checkpoint DLP helps you raise awareness on personal data that flows throughout your organization. It helps you block unauthorized data transmissions and monitor that content. And then you have Checkpoint Capsule Doc, which really makes it very easy, even within user level, to classify data and protect it so that if a Word document, for instance, was created and it contained personally identifiable information, restrictions and rules would apply immediately. Then you have, we stress the importance of looking at logs. I was so proud of this analogy with the security manager looking at logs. So you have the R8010 security management, which really simplifies logging activity and helps security administrators understand if a change has been made to the network, so that if a DPO came and asked you, has there been a change to the way data is accessed within your organization, you should be able to understand that and answer them immediately. And then when it comes to rules and regulations within our GDPR journey, you have the Checkpoint Compliance Blade, which really helps you understand if your configuration is consistent with GDPR. It does not tell you you are GDPR compliant. No one will. But it does help you raise flags as to problems in your configuration for GDPR. I think from what we saw up until now, if you take some critical first steps, if you implement a risk-based approach, and if you implement security controls, you should be okay with establishing a GDPR-aware network. You should be okay with and focused on GDPR and data security. But what has occurred to me while I was working on this presentation is that while all of this is pretty important, it's still kind of reactive, right? And my thought was, if GDPR is a journey, why don't you go the extra mile and do whatever you can to keep threats outside your organization to begin with and prevent them from coming in to keep that data secure? Why don't you think about prevention? So again, if we're thinking about GDPR as it should be, as a broader cultural perceptual change and the way that we secure data, and that doesn't only have to be personal data, it could be business data as well, I encourage you to think about preventing threats from going inside to begin with. And with that, I'd like to bring up Checkpoint Infinity, which is our consolidated security architecture working all across cloud, mobile, and network. It's purely focused on threat prevention and preventing threats, modern Generation 5 threats, which I'm sure you've heard throughout this conference, from going inside your organization. And I think this is a great embodiment of the concept of data protection by design and by default. We talked about architecture and security architecture, and Checkpoint Infinity is a great way to ensure that threats don't go inside your organization to begin with, and that the data is secured. So what are the key takeaways that I'd like you to take with this, from this? So the first is you can, and definitely need by now, be proactive about your GDPR efforts. With 84 days left, again, the deadline will not be the end of it, but you should definitely start wrapping your preparations around it. The second is that although there's still a lot of parts about GDPR that should be determined and unveiled, and we will all learn from it, I do think that if you implement fundamental security controls, you embed a risk-based approach, and you take some critical first steps that are also cost-effective to what you currently have, you should be good to go. And then finally, I do encourage you to think outside that data leakage box and try to think about how you truly keep the data secured by stopping threats from going inside to begin with. I think it's good for data security, I think it's good for GDPR, and I think it's generally good for your business. So that is it, basically. This is a QR code for you to scan and read the full white paper. I really encourage you to go ahead and do it. And so you can do that. I'll go back to it in a second. These are my details. Feel free to reach out at any point if you have any questions. And they gave me this, I don't know if you're still doing the scavengers hunt thing, but this is the tagline that the tagging that they gave me to give you. So feel free to do that. And I'm going to go back to the QR code. Do you have any questions or thoughts that you would like to raise? Yes, please.
User privacy.
User privacy.
Yeah.
Okay.
For example, super admin have all the rights to see in checkpoint management who is accessing what.
Mm-hmm.
For example, if I don't want user to see what all URLs users are seeing,
Mm-hmm.
can we hide in our log management so that super admin even don't have rights to do that?
So you're talking about the actual logging and the security management of Checkpoint.
Yes, because GDPR asks about the user privacy as well.
Right, of course. But GDPR also states under Article 49 that if what you're doing is security measures and security practices are basically, again, and you can go ahead and check Article 49, but they're basically exempt from that. What we're doing is securing data and users, right? So you should be fine with that. And as a general comment, I have to say, all of Checkpoint's products are and will be and are finalizing their compliance with GDPR. So you should be absolutely fine with using them. Does that answer your question? Or
So by when we will be ready?
By 25th May. Basically, we're already ready. I know that our legal consultants are finalizing their statement about that, right? We want to issue a statement saying to all of our customers and partners, rest assured, we're compliant. Of course, we're a security company, and we're committed to that. That is, you don't need to be worried about that whatsoever. I think that we kind of need to wrap up, right? Because there was a bit of a time delay. But feel free to reach out to me. So I'm happy to pick up any conversation and refer you to relevant persons if needed.
It will be for all the checkpoint solutions, including cloud and mobility.
All of Checkpoint Solutions, that's correct. Sure.